Welcome, everyone, to the second keynote session of this Global Leadership Lab immersion on the theme of developing self. We have folks from all over the world joining us on Hopin, on YouTube, and on Facebook. My name is Marta, and I am the Training Manager Fellow here at Atlas Core, connecting with you from Vilnius, Lithuania. I am very excited to be here today and moderate this session and have the pleasure to speak with today's guest. Before we kick off, here is a quick reminder that our Atlas Core team will be monitoring chat on each of the platforms we are using today. So make sure to post questions in the chat at any time, and we will get back to them in the second half of our session today. To make things easier, you can start your comment with the letter Q for question. Tell us where you're from and ask your question. And as I said, we will get back to your questions at the end of today's event. So to warm us up a little bit at first, here's an icebreaker question for all of you. If there is a leader that you truly admire, but you think the world doesn't know enough about them, who is it and why? Tell us. Share about your inspiring leaders that you admire, but think the world should hear more about them in the chat below YouTube or Facebook or Hopin video. While you let us know, let me introduce our today's guest. Juliana coordinates ENAR's advocacy strategy in the field of anti-racism and anti-discrimination at both EU and member states level. She has extensively covered issues related to migration, integration, strategic litigation, and national action plans against discrimination. She is an expert in the different intersections of structural and institutional discrimination with race, gender, migrant status, LGBTQI+, and other minorities' legal frameworks and policies. With strong expertise in gender-based violence, Juliana also provides voluntary legal support to systems of domestic violence across Europe. She is the founder of Revibra, the European Support Network for Brazilian and Latinx women victims of domestic abuse. She was recently nominated as an expert to the European Commission's expert group on migration, integration, and asylum. Today, Juliana is going to share some leadership lessons on overcoming adversity and challenging systems of oppression. Welcome, Juliana.
Hello, Marta. Good morning and good afternoon, depending from where we are. But nice to see you. Thank you for this invitation.
So what about you, Juliana? Is there any leader that you truly admire but think the world doesn't know enough about?
Yes, I have. I think I was much inspired by someone who became very well known after she passed away. I was truly inspired by the queer feminist movement from the favelas in Brazil. So I was deeply I impacted and affected by Marielle Franco's work. So she was someone that was very well known only at local level to particular neighborhoods in Rio, where I come from. And it's really unfortunate what happened to her. But I think her legacy lives behind her. And I think sometimes we have to come back to the locals to really find also the true leaders, those who get inspiration and motivation where there are no resources, but just an ambition to do things differently and to achieve social and racial justice. So and put themselves at risk as well. So she was someone that put herself at risk in so many levels, and there is an unfortunate tragedy what happened to her. But I think my admiration go to all the local leaders that work in visibility and still are there for community support and for the fight against discrimination all over the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's very interesting what you said, and the point that you're making, that great leaders are not only the people that we hear about on the headlines of our TV screens or newspapers, but sometimes the people that will live together in our communities and people that really do the hands-on work. Okay, but let's focus now on you and your leadership story. We're very happy to have you with us today. So let's start with the basics. You currently work as an acting director of the European Network Against Racism. Could you tell our audience a little bit, in a nutshell, what your organization does and what does your role in it look like?
Yes, so ENAR, the European Network Against Racism, is an organization that was found 22 years ago. And in fact, we were there to monitor at the time the two new directives that were approved by the institutions, the EU institutions, in the field of racial justice. So you had two pillars in this legislative framework, which were the Racial Equality Directive from 2000 and the Employment Directive in 2000 as well. Both were approved at the same time, and European institutions were very eager to monitor the impact, the implementation, the transposition of this directive at member states level. And at the time already, there was a lack of trust, or there was a question around accountability of member states, how they would deal with a new instrument that was so progressive for the time, 20 years ago, but that would require a lot of political commitment to be sure that this was done correctly. And therefore, ENAR was implemented as a group of experts trying to ensure that the legislative work done by the European institutions have an impact at national level, and are followed by policies and also by budget. And of course, what we do is really to be the voice of the voiceless and be there to represent people that are silenced throughout their process in life, but also throughout any perspective in different sectors, and they feel discriminated. But they have not the space to do it. And how we do it an advocacy angle. So we are an advocacy organization, but we are evidence-based. So we develop our strategies based on the evidence that we collect in the field of racism, and therefore we have a strong advocacy department, but also a research department that is in charge for all this data collection and all the publications that you put on the table. We have a strong communication department to make sure that we can timely communicate around the development of racial justice in Europe. And we also have a network development department who is in charge of the members, because we are a network based in Brussels, but we have 180 members across the 27 member states, plus the UK and Turkey as well, that are the national organizations, that are the civil society and grassroots organizations doing the magic on the floor. So we are here to be this hub between civil society organizations and activists in the national level, and the EU institutions. We also have a very strong administration department. An organization as ours needs a coordination, needs also to ensure that there is an impact. And therefore, we have a strong admin department, make sure that all the network is protected, that all community is also being heard, and that we can also cater to some needs, especially in Europe right now. Even after the pandemic, what we see is really an increased attack on human rights defenders in Europe, but not all kind of human rights defenders. There is an increased attack on anti-racist human rights defenders and pro-migration human rights defenders, and therefore let's say an immediate support mechanism needs to be created, and therefore ENAR is there also to support people that feel at risk in doing their work in different member states in Europe.
Right. It seems like actually very complex mechanism, and so many organizations, but doing very important work in so many different countries of around Europe, and and also not just the European Union, but the continent in general. And as you mentioned, the topic of racism and discrimination on the base of race is still a very prevalent topic, but it's not the only issue that you're very experienced in. You also have worked with different types of discrimination, for example, based on gender or migration background. And these issues as well are still extremely relevant in today's world. Could you tell us a little more about what was your own journey towards where you are right now? And were you interested in these topics from an early age? Were there any personal experiences or challenges that affected your choice to work specifically with these issues?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question, Marta. And I think it is an interesting question, especially to women who migrate, because migration can shape the way you see yourself as a professional. And therefore, that requires from you a lot of adaptations and a lot of imagination as well. You asked me if I was interested to work in this topic since an early age. No, I have a very interesting background. I think I'm a perfect model of a Brazilian. I had a white mom who was from Portuguese descendant. I had a biracial father who is indigenous and Black. So I was born in this melting pot from people being from European descendant and people being indigenous and being from Black minorities in Brazil. But I had the privilege to have parents who could study and could go to university and could find good jobs. So I had the privilege to have access to good education since my early years. I had also the opportunity to study abroad since I'm an early teen. So I studied outside Brazil in different countries. I also had the opportunity to try some professional experience before deciding to move abroad for good, based on these resources that are put there available for me by my parents. So I'm very unique in that sense that I do not represent the majority of the people from the country that I'm from. So I'm very conscious about my privilege. However, this was not enough to tackle many of the barriers that I could anticipate as being a woman and as being a migrant. And not only any kind of migrant, being a non-European migrant in the context of the European Union. So for me, I always was passionate about international law. So I went to law school. And then I was very eager to work on that, especially for the private sector. But my journey about discrimination begins there when I need to find an internship, either in a private sector or either in legal firms, and nobody accepts me because I don't come either from the good neighborhood or either the let's say the good families, or either I didn't have the best car to talk to clients. So I would be recruited, but immediately I would be dismissed. I always had heard that I was overqualified, especially due to my language skills. That is something not very common in Brazil. For Europe and Americans, North Americans, this is common that you speak many languages, but not in the context of Brazil at the time, 20-something years ago. So my journey started that, and I said, I have how am I going to do it? How is it going to be possible? So I had I was challenged to think outside the box. How could I still do the same thing, but in other sectors? And then I end up being in an oil and gas company doing operations, but that led me to an experience to also work in an international environment. So I was there and I did my whole qualification and the expertise on oil and gas coming from a private sector, but having also an international angle on international contracts, agreements, litigations. But then when I moved to Europe for good after the studies, because I had studied in Europe, but then I had to work in Europe, I saw that it was not possible again to do what I was prepared for. And again, I have to initiate from scratch zero. And here I had the feeling that I have to start everything all over again. And that gave me this feeling of frustration. And then I was again challenged on how can I do to, what could I do to still use the same skills, to still do what I like to do, but in different spectrum. So I had to enlarge my vision. So how could I still do the same thing, doing what I like, but in a different context? And for many of us as being migrants, especially in other countries, the third sector is a good platform for opportunities. So I end up working for civil society organizations in the field of human rights and migration, which for me was a second school, was a second university, a second faculty, because the practice taught me so much about how to be a legal professional, incorporating all the skills that I had already before. And how would I need to learn specifically what is necessary to not lose that chance again, that I could capitalize in that opportunity to move forward and just making myself more prepared for a specific niche. And that's what I started to really like to also accept that there were some things that I need to learn again. There were things that were new to me. There are things that there are situations that it's not the way I wanted, but they were the way they were, and I have to accept that. And I try to also be very honest with people on what I wanted to do, because I was really aware that I should not play with people expectations. If they want me to be there for 10 years, probably I would be there only for a few years, because my journey was different. So I had always had this very honest conversation with the colleagues I was working as well. So I think most of this journey about learning how to survive was really having this 180 degrees sense of perspective about what I could learn from my frustration, or I could sit there, or I could move forward. And I decided to move forward. And then, of course, I never came back to the oil and gas business. I lost this opportunity. If I have to go back again to do it, that I don't feel I'm even have the good skills anymore. But I became a professional using many of my negotiation skills in the business sector, in the non-governmental sector. I used a lot of the tactics that I learned from legal strategies in advocacy strategies. I also learned about how could I put forward my personal skills, my interpersonal skills in advantage when compared to other candidates, because I was not born here. I didn't have the same traditional path. I didn't go to the same college the other candidates were going. So I have to really capitalize in interpersonal skills rather than the hard skills that people were expecting. And I also took the chance to start in jobs that probably were underqualified. Just to give you an example, where I work now for the last 15 years, I entered as a secretary. I went as to work in administration, but they said, well, with your CV, we going to have potential job offers in the upcoming months. Would you be ready to come and wait for a good opportunity in the upcoming months? But I cannot offer you now, but I would be willing to fill in this position now and learn through the process. And I said, yes. And 15 years later, I'm the acting director of the organization. I started as a secretary. And for me, that's not, I think it was I was very fortunate to have this offer, and people who were also trust in my skills to be able to differently. I thought it was, well, I was never so patient. I'm someone who is very anxious, so I had to learn to be patient and to wait a little bit. And I invested all that I could in the time that I could to learn different skills, being things that I would never had thought about, like how to typewrite things faster, um, how to edit a test when I do a letter when you're a secretary, towards more something that is more strategic. So I was not very, I was very arrogant. Arrogance was not something that worked for me. I was very humble and also very open and very thankful to these opportunities that were given on the table for me.
Wow, that is impressive story. So many ups and downs, so many times you had to start from scratch and begin again. And I find it really inspiring how actually through those different boundaries that you experienced in your professional career, especially at the beginning of it, you reached this point where you said, okay, maybe I am not the only one that hits this wall because of either my upbringing or because of where I come from. And then you ended up in an organization that actually deals with those systemic institutional barriers. So you mentioned, as I said, many obstacles on the way. So let me ask you this: how do you stay motivated to do the work that you do, but also take care of yourself and your own well-being? After all, it is not uncommon for people working in this specific field to become disappointed and disillusioned in their fight for social justice, because there is so much to do at all times, and it takes time. So do you have a trick or a secret that keeps you going?
I think it's a very interesting question. I will try to respond it as honest as I can, Marta. I think there is something about mental health of Black people and people that are racialized, people of color. I think the question of well-being, distress, mental stability is something that is not a given for us. It's not. It's also a privilege to be able to take care of your mental health. And I think we be raised as racialized people, as people of color. It seems that this opportunity to take care of our minds was taken out of, like, away from us. So many of us, the way I was raised is that this question of inspiration, motivation, well-being, taking care of self was something that was never, in my upbringing, the way I was raised, was never an option, because I always have to do 3 times more to get 3 times less. So the motivation was always the fact that I had no right to give up, and I have no right to feel pity about myself, and I have no right to just take care of me, because I had to keep running, because as a Black person, as a migrant, as a woman, you have to keep up and have to move on. So I think resilience was really probably is one of my skills. And I think as well, what happens in migration, I think you know as well, is that you find a new family, and you find people that are there to support you throughout the years. So I think my motivation came from also the friends that I had, because they also were sources of inspiration for me. I think as well, what made me really motivated was to learn from other people's struggles, because sometimes you can learn from the others only instead of experiencing yourself. And I think what motivated me was really the fact that it didn't even pass my mind that I have the opportunity to stop, take care of myself, feel sad sometimes, and keep going. It's like privilege is also about that, right? It's also about the privilege of time. Time is a commodity, And what you use for with your time for your well-being, your mental health, is not a privilege for many of us. So I'm sorry to come with a very honest response, but it's just the feeling of keep going and moving forward, because that's the way we exist.
That's true. Well, I think both myself and our audience actually appreciate this honest truth, because we live in a world where we talk a lot about mental health and taking care of yourself, maybe going to therapy, maybe having a spa day. But the reality is that not everyone has the time for it, not everyone has the capacity for it, or the money for it. So in this sense, taking care of yourself can very much be a privilege. And this topic of privilege also you mentioned before, which I found very interesting, that yes, in one sense you can be privileged, let's say, with good education from an early age, but then it can be there can be boundaries and obstacles when it comes to, for example, your gender identity or orientation or race, where you come from, etc. So privilege in one area doesn't mean being privileged in all the other areas. And then this mix that you bring together as a person, then in reality shows where you have access to certain goods and not. Before we go to questions from our audience, I wanted to dive into this topic of societal structures and the system that we live in, where not everyone is given the same privilege. A big part of the world society still functions based on a variety of different systems of oppression, from patriarchy that you already mentioned a little bit, through colonial fantasies of white supremacy, to industrial age exploitation of the working class.
Yeah.
We are all part of these systems, whether we actively support them and benefit from them or not. In your opinion, what is the best way for an individual to educate themselves, become self-aware of how one is or might be contributing to these oppressive systems, and how can one learn to speak up or to help to dismantle those systems?
It's an excellent question, Martin. I think the oppressors and the people that are oppressed, they live in the same system. They are raised in the same system. So it's a deconstruction that should happen to everybody. So it's not only a condition for those who are oppressors, but also for those who are being silenced, because we have also to shift our paradigm, our mindset. I think the question is really complex, because you can only learn what something is about is if you have it or don't have it, or if you lose it. So sometimes people really are not challenged to think outside the box, because they don't have nothing to lose. So I don't think that the best way of learning something new is about bad experience, but I think putting yourself in the place of the other, putting yourself, being in a process of being an active listener, an active learner. I think also the place of accountability. Oh, I'm not sexist. Oh, I'm not racist. We need to be accountable, because accountability is the start of a process. And accountability is about, I'm sorry, I have done that. I was not conscious. I want to do it better. Let me help you. How can I help you? Help me to do it, to make myself better for the future. And I think this is also from a place that people need to be open to put themselves into account and really check themselves what they are doing. And I think this is more about not only education, but more about a personal commitment that you are willing to do something differently. I know that you want to. We talked already before about one of my favorite writers, and I think it's about that. Is how through this self-education you can learn from other people's experience and make sure that this feedback can shape your reality, and from there you can move on. So for me, it's really being accountable, open, an active listener, and be sure that you listen to others people's experience that are different than yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I can't myself count the situations where I try to speak up or bring an issue up that either hurt me or somebody near me, and then would hit this metaphorical wall of just no, I didn't mean it like that, right? But this level of openness that we might unconsciously say things that are not
Yeah.
okay to say or might hurt someone, that it's a possibility, and the way to move forward is just to say, I apologize, thank you for showing me, right? It doesn't have to be super complicated at moments. I see that we have questions coming in from our audience, so let's get into them. Bijan from DC asks, what is the advice that you would give to young and diverse leaders?
I think the young and diverse leaders, I think one of the probably one of the best advice is really to make sure that you take the time to live different experience, try new things, try new perspectives. Sometimes we are so obsessed in achieving something that we forget that are other dimensions, that are other experience around us. I think also for those who have the opportunity, exchange is really important. Going to other places, other cities, other states, other countries, if you have the possibility. And now with the digital world, you can navigate throughout the global from your computer. But if you have it really, the experience of living abroad, this is something that I also say to my children, like the experience of living abroad, uh, knowing new cultures. It's something that if you have the possibility, do not miss of doing that. I think this is an eye-opening experience when you are able to see the world from another point of view. Um, so for me, this would be really a good advice. Try something new. Be always open, and also make your constant check-ins. It's about accountability, right? Be sure that you can learn from each lesson, and uh, you are okay to say probably I did a mistake here, or probably I should have done better, and I'm sure that for the next step I'm going to do it differently.
Thank you so much for these words. I think we could actually use some of it for, advertising our own programs here at Atlas Core, because that's exactly what we are about. The motto of the organization goes, change your perspective, change the world, and with the exchange programs that we do, that's exactly what we're trying to give to young leaders in the world, this opportunity to put themselves and myself, actually, as I'm also a fellow, in different shoes, in different circumstances, environment, from what we know from home, and experience this growth of the unknown. Great, actually, advertisement for what we do here at Atlas Core. Gael from Madagascar asks us, if you could go back and change only one thing in your leadership journey, what would you change?
I think it took me many years, Marta, to be confident, because especially we as women, we are challenged about our confidence all the time. And especially when you start young as well, you are challenged about your age all the time. And when you are migrant, you are challenged about your skills all the time. I think I would have dared to say more clearly that what people were expressing were rude. I think I would have created uncomfortable situations to make people aware of their bias. People are aware of their treatment towards other people, especially towards women. In many meetings, I was asked to serve coffee. I said that I was the pot of flour of the meeting. I wish I should have addressed it in a diplomatic but assertive way to many people. They were sexist, racist, in different settings. I wish I could have called them out in a more confident way before. But now I'm a little bit older, so I don't care. And I think as well there is a learning curve after George Floyd, that people feel more at ease to talk about racism. And I think that's probably one of the good things that this strategy gave us, is the opportunity to create safe space for dialogues. So this is I would have done before, is really be sure that I could speak up and say and call out people that being racist or sexist to me.
That is great. I wish I had that myself as well. I also feel that with age, this confidence to actually stand your ground and even be aware of prejudice or microaggressions comes with time. Even just recognizing that, hey, what somebody tells you that relates to either your race or gender or anything else is actually inappropriate, because we grow up with those microaggressions and people saying the most ridiculous things sometimes, thinking that they're okay. Let me go back a little bit to what you said about your journey as a migrant. I think it might be interesting for our audience to hear if there were any specific culture shocks that you experienced moving from Brazil to Europe, or if there were any differences that you noticed in how people behaved in general, or specifically in regards to those issues that we're talking about, so racism or sexism or any other forms of oppression.
I think the biggest culture shock was the openness, or the lack of openness. I think people from Brazil know by being very warm, friendly, at least at first, like give the impression that we are very warm and friendly and open and very, let's say that we have a kind of elevated interpersonal skills, that we are extrovert, that we like to know people. And for me, this extrovert of the Brazilians versus the introvert of the Europeans was something that was really a big shock for me. I migrated the first time to Europe to study. And even the way we would work in classes at the university was totally different from the context of Brazil. How would we share documents, publications? How would we share information, update each other? Was totally different. Europeans are more private. And in the end, I learned that this privacy, in fact, is just a way of being. It's not they are not interesting on you. It's just that there is another mindset. So there is, and I think that's what we should understand, that this cultural shock sometimes is just a lack of taking the time to understand other people's point of views. And in a way today, I appreciate less and less the super openness of the Brazilian, because this can also lead to misunderstanding that you are super open because you want something from people. So I had super interesting experience being too open. But I appreciate more and more the privacy of the Europeans, and also the time that it takes to make good friends, because friendship is something that you're building. And I think today I can tell that I have very good European friends, but it took time. It took sometimes decades to call someone a friend. So for me, this was really a cultural shock.
Wow, thank you. That is very, very interesting. I have only traveled myself or migrated myself within Europe and still had very similar culture shocks. So I can't imagine how it was moving from across the ocean here and facing all these community or society that you're in. In their eyes, they're behaving exactly how they should and what is their normal, right? And this contrast that you experience in person can have very, very profound effect on your own thinking processes and growth and in education. Speaking of education, you mentioned to me once that a lot of the work that you do is inspired by a Brazilian philosopher and educator, Paulo Freire, whom I also happen to admire. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about his works or why it encourages you to do what you do? And are there any particular lessons that you take away from his writings?
Yes, so Paulo Freire was historian, as a sociologist that became an educator in the 60s in Brazil, challenging how the educational system was reproducing inequalities. So how we were building educational structure to give power just for those who had already power and to exclude those who were already excluded. So education was not a platform for inclusion, it was a platform for exclusion. And he developed different methodologies and concepts that he calls concepts. The concept of dialogue, so the concept of intercultural dialogue comes from one of his concepts. The idea of sensibilization, I think the way they translate it in English is sensibilization, but let's say awareness. Talking about awareness, the way they talk about a transformative justice. He was a critical thinker. I think if you want an analogy to someone that is very close to him from a North American perspective, he's very, very admired by Saul Alinsky, who also got inspiration from Paulo Freire to write the rules for radicals, for example. And then what he tried to achieve was really to for him education was freedom. So he worked in a movement called the movement of liberation, because he thought that freedom was key to empowerment and to tackle and to dismantle oppressions. He had he has written many manuals and books, but the best one for me is the best book for me is the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he really designs, based on the educational model, how oppressions can be dismantled if you empower the oppressed. So he gives many examples, methodologies, and it is really important to understand that his methodology really changed the educational structure of the Brazilian system, because before, people where there was no schools or where there were no educational structure, people were prevented to study and to have access to education. So he created a methodology that anyone could educate people that were where there was no educational system. And also he revolutionized as well traditional educational structures for those who could not learn from the traditional method, the Cartesian pragmatic method. He always understood that people have different abilities to learn. So he created a concept that was everybody has opportunity to learn if you understand how people process the learning. So for me, he was a revolutionary, and his legacy lives. One of the most important legacy in terms of the intercultural diversity, community organizing process was that he inspired a process that called the theater of the oppressed. So it's how dynamics can be created for trainees, education, teachers, educators, in tackling oppressions in the school system, in classrooms and different settings, because for him, education was something that you should create also outside the traditional structures. So for me, I always have it here, so I always make some publicity of his books because I love him. But for me, he was really a genius. He was a critical educator, let's say like that. And he influenced many good people over there.
Thank you so much for this little publicity of Paulo Freire's work. I think for anyone who's listening to us today, that is working in the field of education, and not just formal educational systems, but anyone who is working to educate about the social issues that are happening in the world, and about those different social challenges that we've been mentioning today. This is definitely something to put on the reading list. So thank you very much for this recommendation. I'm looking at the clock right now, and it's unfortunately time for us to wrap up. So I want to thank you so much, Juliana, for joining us today to this keynote session at the Atlas Core Global Leadership Lab. To all of our audience, make sure to follow us on Facebook and YouTube for more engaging content like this. My name is Marta, and our guest today was Juliana Santos Wahlgren from the European Network Against Racism. Make sure to join us tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for another Leadership Journeys call, this time with Terry Broussard-Williams, the founder of the Movement Maker Collective and best-selling author of Find Your Fire. Join us tomorrow, and you might be able to win your own copy of the book. Last but not least, visit apply.atlascore.org to learn about ongoing recruitment for Atlas Core programs. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.